is going to be one of many that we will see repeated. It starts in the book of Genesis, but then it's recapitulated over and over again in the Bible itself. And of course, by extension, these repetitions then become part of Western study as well of other texts. Now, in conclusion, one of the things as well we want to point out is this idea of firsts. So we'll just ask different kinds of firsts. It's always interesting to people who pick up the Bible for the first time to ask, what is this book really about? And so they'll maybe ask a question like, think about this one for a moment. The word love, right? So this would be a fascinating way to look at the book of Genesis. When does the word love actually get used for the very first time? It's going to be fascinating when we stumble across this word love for the first time. In most translations, it's actually not until Genesis 22:2, which is fascinating because we're told that this is the story where a man, a father, Abraham, the father of this amazing people that are going to, by the end of the book of Genesis, be in Egypt. But there we will find in Genesis 22, verse 2, that a father is told to actually take the son he loves and sacrifice him. Usually understood to mean kill him. Whoa! Now that's an interesting use, first time, of the word love. Again, we'll come back to this kind of thinking, of course. We'll focus then about the ways in which this word love gets used over and over again. Leviticus 18:19 says, love thy neighbor as thyself. Christ will say that this is the way you change the world later when we meet Christ in the New Testament. So notice that the use of the word love is going to permeate. But the first time it gets used in the book of Genesis, we're going to want to pay attention to it. Other kinds of firsts that either are or are not in the book of Genesis, we'll obviously ask those kinds of questions. So there it is, an introduction to the book of Genesis. Our work now will begin with starting to look at one or two small parts of the book of Genesis now that we've worked with this overview. Again, my hope here is that in our non-apologetic study of the Bible, we're not looking to argue whether this text is correct or incorrect. This is not our project. Our project is to look at the text as a text. What does it say? What does it mean? How can we relate to it, either in regards to other texts or relate to it ourselves? My hope is that you will in the end pick up the text. Now we will turn to Genesis 1 and 2, and what has often been referred to as cosmogonic stories, that is to say stories of origins. And we're going to ask this question about the word myth, and why it is that often certain stories in the early part of Genesis by scholars have been labeled as myths, and are we saying something really terrible about stories when we call them myths? I'm going to go back to what I've said earlier in many lectures in 303. We use the term myth not in any kind of derogatory way, but rather to say a story to explain the unexplainable. And when we come back for our next lecture, we'll talk about these cosmogonic stories because cultures always seem to have them, and they, of course, will permeate the ways in which we understand ourselves and, of course, deity. Thank you. I'll see you back in a while.